Hi everybody, so welcome back to our YouTube channel where we talk about something interesting in the legal sector or something you should probably know. So my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. What do I want to talk about today? Now today I want to talk about a specific question that tends to be very problematic and confuses a lot of folks. So what is this question? Now the question is, does Lobolo or Lobola constitute a customary marriage in South African law? Does the fact that a person is paid Lobola mean that an actual customary marriage has come into existence? Let's have a brief discussion and see if we can get to the answer of this question. Number one, let's talk about what is Lobola. Now, the definition given to Lobola in terms of South African law is that it is property that is in cash or in kind that is going to be provided by the groom's family or the groom or the prospective groom's family to the prospective wife's family. So which means they have to pay some form of money or property which is in kind to the prospective groom's, the wife's family in consideration of marriage. So this amount of money or this kind property that's given is in consideration of a customary marriage. So one could actually say that it's one of the things that initiates or even concludes a customary marriage in some customary cultures. Now, does this mean then that once this money is paid or whatever it is that's given to the prospective wife's family, we have concluded a customary marriage? Not necessarily. Here's why. Now, in terms of South African law, specifically the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, there's specific requirements that need to be met before a customary marriage comes into existence. Let's see and talk about those specific requirements. Number one, these parties that want to get or enter into this customary marriage must be over the age of 18. Number two, they must actually consent to this particular marriage, which means they must have an intention to get into this type of marriage. Number three, there must be some form of celebration, or the marriage must be entered into or concluded or negotiated in terms of custom. Now, if you look at the two requirements, the first two requirements that we spoke to, there isn't much that's complicated about what is requested and what the requirement needs in order for it to be met. There must be a consent, intent to enter into this marriage, and there must be a certain age, which is something we can establish fairly quickly. Now, the third requirement is where the issue of Lobola comes in, because now we have to determine whether this marriage that we're speaking to has been celebrated and negotiated and entered into in terms of custom. Now, the reason why, you're probably thinking, why did the legislator not just provide a specific requirement that needs to be met on the last requirement, which is the third requirement? Now, it's understandable why the legislator would draft it this way, because in South Africa, there's quite a number of cultures, and in those cultures, there's quite a number of customs. And so, like I said, even though in some cultures, the payment of Lobola is a conclusion of a customary marriage, in some customs in South Africa, it's actually one of the initiating steps to a customary marriage. So it's not necessarily a customary marriage. So that's where the trick comes in. So what have the courts said about this? What has their stance been on this particular question? Now, because of the broadness of the third requirement, there's been quite a number of cases being taken to court, and I want to speak to just one. This particular case was decided in the Supreme Court of Appeal, and this case is that of Tambo versus Sengad. It was decided in 2020. If people know HHP, you would know that that is his actual name. So at the passing of HHP, which is Mr. Tambo, The wife or the prospective wife, which is Miss Sengadi, actually wanted a declarance from the court that she was married to Mr. Tambo, which is double HP. But Mr. Tambo's family was disputing this, stating that a customary marriage never came into effect because, number one, there was no handing over of Miss Sengadi. Now, we do know in some customary marriages, they require that the wife be handed over to the groom's family. So in this particular case, it was stated or alleged by the family that this had not been done. And because of the absence of this, therefore, there was no marriage between the two parties. But what had happened prior to the passing of Mr. Tambo, which is double HP? Now, what was clear in the particular case and undisputed by the family of double HP is that the Lobola had been paid for Miss Sengadi. There was a proper negotiation, and Miss Sengadi was introduced to the family as the wife, and she was acknowledged as the wife, amongst other things. And so because of this, Miss Sengadi said, it could be decided that she was married in terms of custom because the most important things happened, and she was recognized as a wife by the family. So the fact that the handing over never happened should not negate the marriage in itself. So there was this particular dispute, and therefore the court needed to see whether or not, or decide whether or not a marriage did in fact come into existence. Now, one of the interesting things that I liked about this judgment is that the court made it clear that currently we are living in a constitutional era. Now, in a constitutional era where customary law exists, it must be or is subject to the Constitution. And in the constitutional era that we live in, things change, customs change, people change. If you take note and do a proper investigation or analysis, you would find that majority of the customs that were performed 30, 40 years ago, for instance, are no longer performed the same way because people tend to change certain things because they adapt, especially now that people are moving away from the rural areas to the cities. So a lot of the customs are now being diluted and being done differently and are changing, and that is acceptable in a constitutional era. And so the court said that the fact that the family is now standing on the leg that the wife or Miss Sengadi was never handed over is more of a discriminatory stance to request or to say that a customary marriage won't come into effect unless, of course, the groom's family or the prospective wife is actually handed over. Now, because of this, the court said the fact that handing over did not take place will not negate a marriage coming into existence. Now, one of the things I also liked about this judgment is that they looked at not only the specific requirements of a custom, they also looked at other surrounding circumstances and factors. Number one, Miss Sengadi Lobola had been paid for Miss Sengadi to her family. She had been introduced as a wife. She was acknowledged as a wife. She had lived with the deceased as a wife. And so looking at all of these surrounding circumstances, it could be decided based on that and the fact that these things occurred, that in actual fact, these two were married. So I didn't go into depth with some of the arguments, but I just wanted us to highlight the most, or how we actually got to this particular decision or what was considered. So those are the things that courts will now take into account. They won't only take into account what the custom says. They'll also look at what the Constitution requires when interpreting customary law. They will also look at the surrounding circumstances when they have to get to this particular answer. So, what is the answer to our question? Lobolo is not necessarily a determining factor. In fact, it's not a requirement in terms of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. But once Lobolo has been paid and certain things have been acknowledged and done, and the surrounding circumstances speak to a marriage coming into existence, it may be that a court will decide that a customary marriage came into effect or came into existence. Sorry. So, what is my advice and suggestion to you if you're thinking about getting or entering into a customary marriage? Number one, if you're thinking of paying Lobola, just know that you run the risk of actually being declared as someone who is married in terms of custom. So what is it that you need to do to safeguard yourself? Prior to paying Lobola, maybe have a discussion of whether this is actually what you'd like to do so that it is not misconstrued when time comes. So if you want to get married, make sure you do it, but bear in mind that if you're just going to pay Lobola, it might be construed that you're actually married in terms of custom. However, in terms of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, it is not a specific requirement that once Lobola is paid, then a marriage has come into effect. The most important thing is that the third requirement requires that this marriage be celebrated according to custom, or it be entered into and negotiated. I hope this discussion was helpful, and hopefully we got to the answer of our initial question of this discussion, which was, does Lobolo actually constitute a customary marriage in South Africa? My name is Yolanda Mnyangeza, and I'm hoping to see you next time when we talk about something interesting or something you should know within the legal sector. Please hit that subscribe button, follow us for more content.